Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jan. A recent German poll suggests the far-right AfD party may be poised for a landslide win in one of the country's regions, prompting speculations of a potential political earthquake in the subsequent nationwide vote. Could the rise of populism in Europe's largest economy spell doom to the very foundations of the European Union? What could it mean for NATO, for NATO's eastern flank, and for Ukraine's struggle against Russian aggression? Joining us here today to discuss the possible scenarios is Sebastian Schäffer, Director at the Institute for the Danube region and Central Europe. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
Right, so according to the polls, the AfD may well win in Saxony-Anhalt. What could it mean for the region, but also how likely is it that such a victory could translate into a broader political change on a nationwide scale?
Well, first of all, of course, we need to see that this is an election in a state, and it's one of the smaller states in Germany. So it will not have an immediate impact, for instance, with votes in the second chamber. But of course, it shows a certain trend. And you're absolutely right that a victory of the AfD here could translate then also in further strengthening of the polling in a federal election, where the AfD currently is already also leading polls, but not with the possibility to receive an absolute majority, which is likely to happen in Saxony-Anhalt. And the polling shows that they are currently at 41% in Saxony-Anhalt, which actually could translate into an absolute majority, depending on which parties make it into parliament. But it might very well be that it's, even if they don't get an absolute majority of the votes, that there will be an AfD prime minister. And this is, of course, something that has not happened before in the history of the Federal Republic of Germany. And this might really send a signal that the AfD has arrived completely in governing in Germany. We have to add here as a final sentence that the AfD in Saxony-Anhalt is considered to be definitively far-right.
So now, looking at the federal level, what kind of configuration would need to come into being for the leaders of the AfD to even consider the possibility of forming a government? Since obviously, the polls do not indicate that the AfD could reach absolute majority during federal elections, meaning it would need a coalition partner. Now, how likely is that to happen?
At the moment, it's not very likely, but here again, there will be other elections, and this could send ripple effects to the federal party of the Christian Democrats, where Chancellor Merz has the lowest approval ratings of all chancellors in the history of the Federal Republic. He has made his electoral campaign in 2025 on making things better. He has not delivered. And there are voices, of course, in the Christian Democrats that are saying, okay, if this is not functioning, maybe we need to look for other options. Maybe we need to think about possibilities how to find different coalitions. This is not the majority in the Christian Democratic Union at the moment, but there are voices rising within the party, but also outside of the party, that say that this so-called firewall against the AfD should be torn down, and that this substantial amount of votes cannot be excluded from our governing possibility. I don't see it at the moment on a federal level, but very well ripple effects might come from these state elections.
But what will happen to parties that decide to break down this firewall? Because we know that the AfD is not quite similar to the other parties. It tends to legitimize certain practices and certain historical precedents, let's just say, that used to be taboo in Germany, and for a good reason. Do you think that parts of the democratic establishment possibly caving in to the AfD could simply end up being ostracized later on and being forced out of the political mainstream. So basically either they end up joining the AfD altogether or risk vanishing from the political scene as a result.
I mean, the major discussion actually, I think, should have been how can we break this dominance of political discourse that the AfD is successfully running. They are mainly banking on, I would say, 4 pillars. It's the dissatisfaction with the federal government, the desire for fundamental change in the structures of Germany. In this case of Saxony-Anhalt, also especially the East German experience, where they have the feeling that they are still some sort of second-class German citizens. And of course, also the overall disillusionment with the traditional party system, translating policies that are related to migration and security. And this is something that has fueled the rise of the AfD, and the democratic parties have not found a way to actually break this dominant news cycle, because the AfD doesn't provide solutions to it. They don't have to. They are in opposition. And this is the dangerous thing, that ultimately, if you exclude them, that they will be able to continue claiming that they are excluded, that they don't get the possibility to govern. And this is something where I would say I'm not calling for inclusion of the AfD into government. I think this is a very dangerous precedent, and it would actually have very dangerous developments within the Federal Republic of Germany. However, the only way to prevent them would be currently in Saxony-Anhalt, for instance, an all-party coalition against them. And this cannot be the only factor that brings those parties together. We need content solutions and not a policy against one single party that, as I said, is definitively far-right in Saxony-Anhalt, but also in general, I would say, very dangerous in undermining the democracy that has grown over the past almost 8 decades in Germany.
Right, so let's talk about a few of the tenets of the political program, the overall set of proposals that AfD is bringing to the table, right? You've mentioned the criticism of institutions, the European Union, the current government, but there is also the question of historical policy, which in Poland, of course, is rubbing many people the wrong way, given that this new historical policy might be expected to include the at least partial rehabilitation of figures from Germany's Nazi past, which we haven't seen happening with any major political force since the end of World War II. But then there is also the question of support for Ukraine, of the position vis-a-vis Russia, again, something that we in Poland are particularly sensitive towards, given, for example, the history of the ill-fated Nord Stream project. So do you think that this is a major threat here, that under a potential AfD government, Germany would reorient its foreign policy in a very fundamental way?
Absolutely. I think if we only consider that there is the idea of maybe even leaving the European Union, which would be catastrophic for the economy of Germany, also for the European integration project itself, it shows us that this is something that is sowing on the fundamental basis of the European continent. This historical revisionism that the AfD is showing, especially in certain East German Bundesländer, is again also something that I believe is fundamentally dangerous to the consensus that we've had in the German democracy over the past 8 decades, because it is, as you rightly state, reconsidering how we should organize ourselves with regards to the European Union, but also with regards to NATO. It is a very pro-Russian approach, is pressing for ending the support to Ukraine, which is, of course, only defending itself against the Russian aggression, it is also very clear that there are certain ties to the Russian Federation, which is, to me, also very baffling if we look at the history of East Germany, which has not had a very fond memory in the beginning of the end of the GDR when it comes to the Soviet Union and particularly also the Russian Federation, but now seems to have transformed in some sort of Stockholm syndrome that they have this open friendliness towards the Kremlin, which is of course a result of a lot of propaganda that is also fueled through hybrid attacks that are coming from the Russian Federation. But in general, again, I would say we would have to ask the democratic parties to finally provide solutions to the issues that the AfD is having the dominant news cycle on. This is migration, this is security, because the solutions that they are providing, the ideas that they are floating, are certainly not going to make us more secure, are not going to make us more prosperous. Nevertheless, the people believe that this approach is something that is viable, and this is very, very dangerous to the core essence of democracy in Germany.
Sebastian Schäffer, was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And I'm Jan Ashlewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news, updates and commentary.